Hey there, and welcome to this week's edition of the Life and Legacy Show, sponsored by the Sechler Law Firm, where great families make great estate plans. I am your host on this radio show each and every week. My name is Tim Sechler. I am the owner of the Sechler Law Firm, and for the last 12 or 13 years of my life, I have been helping families create great estate plans to protect their families, to protect their money. And a lot of that conversation over the years, if you've listened to the radio show before, you found us on YouTube or however you found us, if you've seen this before, you're aware of the fact that most of our conversation is with regard to retirees and baby boomers and setting up effective estate plans that take into account things like how to stay in your home as long as possible and protection of assets and that kind of stuff. And we've done a ton of that content. Um, And recently, we've noticed this trend in the law firm where we now have much younger families reaching out to us to do estate planning. There's a couple of different times where people will do an estate plan during their life. The first time that people will do an estate plan is either right after they get married or if they have little kids, they'll reach out and want to do an estate plan to sort of get their life together for the little guys. The next time people do it is around this sort of like empty nester time period. Now we've saved some money, kids are out of the house. Maybe we're thinking about retirement in the next couple of years, wanting to get our ducks in a row for what that might look like. And we might revisit this whole estate planning thing now that we actually have some stuff. Then when people retire or like in their senior years, people will revisit the estate plan because at that point in time, they're more concerned about healthcare events. They were more concerned about, our now adult children, our now potentially even adult grandchildren and how they're going to manage an inheritance and all the rest. And things are very more palpable at that point in time. But we have increasingly been contacted by families who are younger in their late 20s through mid 40s, 50, who have young kids. And when I say young kids, I even mean up to include like college age kids, right? But I've got kids and I want to do some estate planning because if something happens to me, these kids need me, whether the little guys are college students, they're still relying on me for finances. They're still relying on me for help with major life decision making, et cetera. And so I need to do some estate planning because, part of being a great parent is planning for your own absence. I mean, it's, whether I'm here or not, my three little kids need to end up being great humans. I mean, part of my job as being a parent, like my primary role in being a parent is to make sure that my kids aren't jerks when they're adults, right? I mean, that's kind of part of this is that we don't just transfer value. We don't just transfer money. We transfer morals and values, right? And so, our conversations at the dinner table every night are not, hey, here's some money, go fend for yourself. It's teaching them life's lessons. It's, and that needs to continue, even if I don't. If I get taken by an accident, if I get taken by a drunk driver, I want to make sure that my kids are still well provided for, right? It's part of my job. And so we've started to encounter more and more young families wanting to do better planning for their kids. And so in our approach, if you're familiar with how we operate, at the Sechler Law Firm, we are an education first law firm, right? Because there is lots to learn about this stuff. You need to understand wills, you need to understand trust, you need to understand how all this stuff works together. And so when we're working with our more senior clients, we offer these free in-person workshops or webinars where you learn this stuff that I think that are appropriate for seniors and retirees. And what's been happening is we've had young families showing up in our estate planning workshops, but the conversation in our estate planning workshops is largely not like, catered for them. It's more about like long-term care and staying in your house and nursing homes and stuff. And so we got our act together and we figured out that we should be doing some education events for younger families on what that type of an effective estate plan looks like. And it's been awful fun for us to put this together because it turns out it's my estate plan. I am in my 40s. I have little kids. I have an estate plan and I think it's a good one. And so it's been neat for me to think about these education meetings in a different way, because what are the things that you need to think about as a parent of little guys? From my standpoint, it's become a much more real conversation. It's much more palpable for me in my current situation, because I've been doing estate planning since I was in my late 20s and working primarily with retirees. And now we've decided that this young family demographic is a demographic that is reaching out to us for help. So let's help them. And so, like, I'm happy to explain. I'm happy to sort of announce, I guess, that we're having our first events for younger families. So if you've been listening to this, maybe I'm even speaking to some of our existing clients whose kids need to do estate planning. We're going to do these at first as webinars because I have little kids and I know how busy families with little kids are. So these are going to be lunchtime, noon webinars where you can log in for an hour and learn a lot of the things that you need to know about estate planning in order to make great decisions. Now, you're also going to learn about our law firm and how it all works and operates, and you'll learn all the things that you need to have a great conversation with your spouse about estate planning. But we're going to host our first young family webinars coming up, and we plan to hold these like every other week or so. And so, if you'd like to register and find out about these webinars, go to sechlerlawfirm.com and go to the workshops tab, and you're going to find a link to put your contact information in to register for the workshop webinar. This is a free webinar. It's called The 5 Secrets to Protect Your Family. It is a customized estate planning talk for people with minor children or with children, that are in their 20s and still behave like minors. And we're going to teach you the things that you need to know. And so here's some of the stuff I wanted to do on today's show, some of the things that you will learn if you decide to attend the webinar. Here's what we're going to be talking about. Okay. One of the things that I want you to know is that most young families do this wrong. Okay. If you go on the internet, you will be led to believe that all you need is a simple will, right? Wills for $100 or whatever, right? Well, yeah. So there's a difference between estate planning and a document, right? And the hard part about this is really understanding how these tools work. See, a will is just a tool, but there are other tools. There are trusts, there are beneficiary designations, there are powers of attorney. There's other tools that you need to think about. In that collection of tools is an estate plan, but just focusing on one tool and saying, I've got a plan, that's like saying I own a hammer, and so I've got a toolbox, right? Well, no, you've got a hammer, but you probably want a screwdriver, and you probably want a wrench set, and you probably want some wire snips, and you probably want some other tools in that toolbox. And the same applies when it comes to estate planning. Whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you're healthy, whether you're not, you probably need some other tools in that toolbox. All right. So why is a will, which is in every estate plan we do, there's a will. That's one of the tools in the toolbox. But why is it that a will is not the only tool that you need? Well, let's talk about a will. What does a will do? The primary purpose of a will is to answer the question, who gets my stuff when I pass away? Right. Okay. Well, that's an important question, but it's not the only important question, and the will doesn't answer that question for all of your assets. So let's play with this for a little bit, right? Let's say I have a will that says all of my things go to my wife, and if she is deceased, it goes to my kids. Okay, great. Well, here's the thing. Most of what I own would never go through my will in the first place, right? Most of what I own, retirement accounts, life insurance, most of the things that most young families own, they don't go through the will, right? Your retirement account does not go through your will. Your retirement account will go via the beneficiary designation you put on the account when you opened it, right? So if you've got a 401k at work, you filled out a form that said all to my wife and my kids. Okay. Well, okay, good. That's what that is, right? But it doesn't matter what the will says. But here's the thing. The will goes a step further. And the will says, okay, all of my stuff goes to my wife and to my kids, or to my spouse and to my kids. But if the kids are minors, here's what you do. Okay. Now the will is answering another question. The will is now answering the question, what happens if someone's underage? And then you can put these provisions in a will, right? Now, there's a couple of different options at this point. If I have minor children, which is really what we're talking about here. I mean, what are we really talking about? If you're married and you got little kids, what we're really talking about is what happens if my wife and I manage to score a sitter on a Friday night, we have a well-deserved date out, we have a glass of wine, we have a nice dinner, and on the way home we get hit by a drunk driver. Okay. Everything was going right, and now it's not. Okay, what we're really talking about in a lot of the sense with young kids is what happens if it's both of us, right? Um, and if it's both of us, now the will says equal shares to the kids. And if they're under the age of 21, then do this. Okay, so let's talk about what those options are. Option one is you could do what's called a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account. This would be like the default rule. So if you got super simple will that doesn't have any provisions in it, your will say, well, give it to the kids, but then the law will kick in and say, yeah, but we probably shouldn't give them control of that money until they're 18 or 21. And so then the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act kicks in and governs those provisions, right? And it'll put somebody else in charge of the money until 21, but they still get the money at the latest at their 21st birthday. Right, so let's talk about that for a second. You get your money on your 21st birthday. So let's say that there's a couple $100,000 in home equity or whatever it is that goes through this will, and now it's going to the kids. And it's going to end up with them on their 21st birthday. Now ask yourself this question. What kind of a person would you have turned out to be if you received a high six-figure, seven-figure inheritance on your 21st birthday? Because see, we're not just talking, it's not just the things that you think you own, but most parents have like life insurance policies, or they have a retirement account, they have home equity, but there's term life insurance is a thing that a lot of young families go out and buy, and you can go buy $1 million of term life insurance company for the cost of a cup of coffee once a month when you're young, right? So you go out and you buy this term life insurance policy, and it says to your kids, and then your kids get on your 21st birthday. Now, imagine if you went to college, or if you didn't go to college, imagine yourself 20 years old. Okay. I was in college at 20 years old, and I was working hard because I needed to set myself up with a career. I wanted a good GPA. I wanted good references by my professors. I wanted to have this resume that I could then take to future potential employers and say, look at me, I had a 4.0, I had whatever, right? Okay. Well, would you have worked that hard if you knew that on your 21st birthday you were going to get $1 million? I think there's some real questions about whether I would work that hard if my parents were gone. I was not getting the moral and value training that I used to get from them. But they had this thing set up for me with term life insurance that had $1 million. And on my 21st birthday, my uncle's out of the way, and I'm in control of the money. And my uncle's telling me I need to do good in school. But regardless of what my uncle tells me, on my 21st birthday, I'm a millionaire, right? And so I probably wouldn't make all that great of decisions. I'd probably get by with C's, get degrees, and spend a lot of the time in the bar. And I don't care about that next job. I got $1 million, right? That would have been the mentality I probably would have had at 20 years old. And does that work, right? I mean, is that the estate plan that you want for your kids? Because if you're listening to this and what you have is a simple will, and what you have is a whole bunch of life insurance, either through your employer or term or whole or whatever, and you got a retirement account that says all to my wife and then to the kids. If you're in that situation, understand this is your estate plan. Your estate plan is to give all the money to your kids on their 21st birthday, and they're going to know that ahead of time, right? Is that a good estate plan? You have documents, but is that a good estate plan? Because I think the way I view the world, part of our job as parents is to raise good humans, not just get them alive till that age, but make sure that they are upstanding citizens at that age, and have an opportunity to work and fail and lose and win and learn lessons and move on to the next one, right? And I'm not sure how hard they'll be working in learning those lessons if they got $1 million on their 21st birthday and they know it 5 years ahead of time. So, what else are your options? Well, let's go back to the will. In the will, you could say that in the event someone under the age of, say, 25 or 30 is to receive an inheritance, what we're going to do is we're not going to use uniform transfers to minors accounts. What we're going to do is we're going to hold the money in a trust. Now we're going to hold the money in a trust, right? And we're going to put somebody in control of this money in the trust. But then that person has some terms and conditions on what we're allowed to do with the money. So think of the trust. Like we like to use a little red wagon, like picture a radio flyer to describe the concept of a trust. So if you can imagine a wagon in your hand, there's three people involved in a trust. The person who creates it is called the grantor. That's the person who puts stuff in the trust. If you're creating trust for your little kids, you've passed away, you're what's called the grantor. You created this trust, you put some money in it, right? The person in control is the trustee. And if you're gone, you're going to tell me who that is. That might be a grandparent. It might be an aunt or an uncle, a family friend. That person is going to be the trustee on the trust. That person is in control of the money in the trust. That person has control. And then your kids, in theory, then are the beneficiaries, right? So you created, somebody's in control. Your beneficiaries are your kids. They have access to the money under the terms and conditions of the trust document that says they can use the money for their education and they can use the money for a reasonable standard of living. And those terms are interpreted by and administered by that trustee you put in charge, right? So here's a scenario. I could create a will that says if when I pass away, anybody inherits under the age of 25, create a trust. And here's what the terms of that trust say. The terms of that trust say that Uncle John is in control of the money until you're 25 years old. Between the time you inherit the money and the time you turn 25, Uncle John will use the money for your education, for a reasonable standard of living. If you need access to more money, you need to talk to Uncle John. Uncle John is the keeper of the checkbook, which makes sure that you 21-year-old don't blow all the money on sports cars and cases of beer. And, we've got a mature person that's making these decisions. Okay. And then you can choose what age that trust might go to. That trust might go to age 25. That trust might continue in existence until, say, like age 30, whatever you want to do. You could. But here's the problem. There's two problems with doing this in a will. The first problem is if you do this in a will, almost nobody connects the dots. And what do I mean by the dots? Well, young parents, you don't own much. More than likely, you don't own all that much. I mean, you've got some bank accounts, you have car, some home equity, maybe you got some money, but the money that you got is probably the way it works with most families is in retirement accounts. Maybe you've got some investment accounts, and if you're married, that's probably a joint investment account, or maybe you've bought a rental property or something that's probably a joint rental property. Here's the point: none of that stuff goes through your will, right? If you have a retirement account, you have a beneficiary designation on that retirement account. If you've got a life insurance policy, which please have a life insurance policy. I mean, this stuff is so cheap, guys. It just says an aside, when I'm working with young families and I review their financial picture, almost 100% of the time, we tell them to go buy more life insurance. I don't sell life insurance. I don't have a dime and whether this I don't make a dime if they go buy the life insurance or not, but you need to go buy the life insurance, right? Talk to somebody who can help you settle on the amounts, but almost no parents have enough life insurance. Anyway, I'll get back on track. So you got some life insurance, you got a retirement account, you got a joint stuff with your spouse, you pass away. The IRA goes according to the terms of the beneficiary designation. The 401k plan at work goes according to the terms of the beneficiary designation you have on file with at work with the HR office. The life insurance policy that I hope you have, that you probably bought on the internet, goes according to the terms of the beneficiaries that you put on file with the life insurance company. And all of those beneficiary designations almost certainly say all to my spouse and then to the kids, right? They almost certainly don't say all to my spouse and then to my estate. Well, what's the difference? Well, if you say all to my spouse and then to the kids, I could write you could have the world's best will. that has all these provisions that we're going to protect your kids from themselves and their poor decisions until they're 30 years old. But if you leave all the money via beneficiary designation on a retirement account or a life insurance policy directly to the kids, guess what? The terms of the will don't apply. The terms of the will only apply to assets that are in your estate. And so if we send the assets directly to the kids via beneficiary designation, all that handy work that you put into the will doesn't apply. And your kid is still a jerk on his 21st birthday because he's still going to get that term life insurance money on his 21st birthday because you didn't connect the dots, right? There's some work that needs to be done with the financial institution and those beneficiary designations and your estate planning attorney to make sure that it all works together, which is why estate planning is more than a document. It's why them telling you all you need is a simple will is not true. That would lead you to believe that it is true. But if we're doing this, and if we're gonna do estate planning for little kids, it's worth doing it correctly, right? If we're saying we need to have some documents in place because we love our kids, well, then I suggest to you, you also love your kids enough to do it correctly because we're talking about the worst possible situation. The worst possible situation is both spouses, both parents are wiped out in an accident. Now, what are the kids going to be dealing with for the next several years of their lives? And man, is it worth just doing it correctly so that those kids are well provided for, whether you're here or you're not. Here's another challenge I have in saying that that all you need is a will is judges don't always follow wills. Sometimes judges impart their own decision making into the interpretation of a will. I had an estate in a county in Western Pennsylvania where I had minors who were going to inherit money. And the will said that the will actually said specifically that the kids should receive their inheritance in a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, which would have put an uncle in charge of the money until the kids turned 21. And the judge said, no, that's not what we're going to do. I said, well, what are we going to do? And the judge said, well, we're going to put the money in court sequestered accounts, which means the judge is in control of the money. And I said, respectfully, Your Honor, the will says Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. It's called the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act because the legislature saw fit to pass a law for exactly the scenario that we're here talking about today. Why is it that we're not listening to the person who passed away and their express wishes in their will? And why is it we're not following the law set forth by the people in Congress? And the judge explained that he had an uncle in a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act that that had stolen money from his nephew, and that from now on, the judge had determined that it was in kids' best interest that that judge be in control of the money, which seems to be in contradiction to what the person who passed away said, and presumably had been counseled on. And as soon as I saw a judge do that, change the terms of the person's will to impact the lives of the minor child who is about to inherit money, I changed my own estate plan to not involve judges. We're using trusts. We're not going through the court system because what I say goes. I'm not interested in the opinion of a judge to determine what is in my kid's best interest. And so I've become very opinionated over my years of doing this stuff on how we do it correctly. And that's what I wanted to teach you to do. I want to teach you how to plan correctly for your kids. That is the purpose of our upcoming webinar called The 5 Secrets to Protect Your Family. If you're a parent, I don't care if your kids are little. I don't care if you're expecting or if your kids are little or if your kids are in college. If your kids are in need of your assistance from time to time, from a decision-making standpoint, from a financial standpoint, this webinar is for you. In particular, if they're little guys, we need to put a plan in place for what would happen if something happens. We got to think about the unthinkable. That's our job, is to wrestle with the tough stuff. And if you would like to join us on this free webinar to understand how to protect your kids, how to protect your money, and how to set this thing up for your kids' success, I invite you to join us at the webinar. Go to sechlerlawfirm.com, Secler lawfirm.com. We're going to have this over the noon hour, so you can take it during your lunch break if you want. So many people are working from home. I don't know that that's actually going to be a problem. But if you go to sechlerlawfirm.com, go to the workshops tab, you will find the 5 secrets to protect your family. It's a workshop designed for families with little kids. And I look forward to seeing you there. I thank you for listening to today's show. Remember, this is for your education and information. Don't make any decisions based on what you heard on this or any other radio show. I am a lawyer. I am not yet your lawyer, though we would love to do some work with you. Give us a call or go to sechlerlawfirm.com to learn more. Thanks.